Welcome to the Sportsman's Voice Roundup, your weekly look at conservation and sporting community news happening across the nation and on the Hill. Thanks for tuning in. This is the TSV Roundup. All right, ladies and gentlemen, as you can hear from the the background noise, we are live from SHOT Show, but our work doesn't stop. We're out in Vegas doing good work, but we got some Sportsman's Voice Roundup activity to bring you up to speed on, so we're doing it here. This week's lead story, Congressional Sportsmen's Caucus members get to work on federal firearms legislation. Taylor Schmitz is here with me. We'll bring him to you momentarily to break that all down. CSF's year-in review report is now available for your reading pleasure. Third full week of new Congress, three CSF priorities set to receive vote on House floor. CSF efforts maintain recreational shooting access to 1.3 million acres of public land. Bill to discard proposed fishing closures introduced. Legislation to increase poaching penalties and fines introduced in Tennessee. Congressional Sportsmen Foundation launches Forestry Advisory Council. We got good news on the whales speed limit. Semi-automatic firearm ban introduced in Colorado. Colorado quickly becoming New York. They're going to do Colorado things. That's going to be my new saying. Indiana bill would create an unfunded mandate for the DNR. And finally, gosh, we got a lot to go over this week. Sportsmen's Caucus co-chair reintroduces one of CSF's top priorities in the Old Dominion state. All that and much, much more as we are reporting from SHOT Show in Las Vegas. But let's welcome in Taylor Schmitz, our Director of Federal Policy. Taylor, thanks for making the time.
Brad, great being here as always.
So we got some good stuff to talk about. First and foremost, our Hearing Protection Act, HPA, was introduced. I'll let you dive into it. The Sporting Firearms Access Act. And then we got some news on Bears ears.
Yeah, that's correct. So as you mentioned, really big week in D.C. For the Congressional Sportsmen's Foundation. But we're actually out here at SHOT Show, so on some of these issues, it's great timing for us. One of these notably was the introduction of the Hearing Protection Act, as you mentioned, which is a longstanding priority for us at CSF. As many of the listeners know, that when you go to purchase a firearm suppressor, it goes through the National Firearms Act and all the process that's associated with that, including a Form 4, sending in fingerprints, et cetera, et cetera. Essentially what this bill would do would be treat a suppressor essentially just like purchasing a regular firearm. So you go in, you pick out your suppressor off the wall and say, that's what I want. And then you go through an instant NICS background check just as you go through to purchase a shotgun, rifle, handgun, et cetera. So it takes suppressors out of the National Firearms Act and treats them just like a firearm. Importantly, you'll still have to go through that background check process. The other important part of this bill is it would establish an excise tax under the Pittman-Robertson Act for suppressors. The ATF recently has said that they expect to process about 1.5 million suppressor applications this year. So let's just say you take an $800 suppressor, you add a 10% excise tax onto that to benefit conservation, recreational shooting access, etc. You're talking real money for on-the-ground projects. So we're really excited about that. And we'll obviously be working in the 119th Congress to get that one done. The other is the Sporting Firearms Access Act. Essentially what this bill is, there's some nuances within the ATF as it relates to importing certain firearms from foreign countries. There is a sporting exemption. However, because of some nuances and things get tied up, some of the commonly used firearms by sportsmen and women get caught up and are unable to be brought into this country. So this legislation just simply fixes that and establishes a sporting purpose exemption for many of the firearms that are of interest to us as hunters and recreational shooters.
Very good. You know, you like to see the silencer issue get squared away here at some point, whatever the fix is, and this sounds like a good one. You know, when we were with our friends last September and gearing up for our banquet, I was able to stop over and see our friends at NSSF, you know, and having conversations about silencers and just, you know, using in overseas as an example, you could pick these things up in a hardware store, right? So like even the Europeans got something figured out with these things. So I would say if Europeans can figure it out, maybe we should probably figure it out too.
Yeah, that's exactly right. I mean, again, the fact that these things are treated an accessory, that's no different than a scope or anything like that. It's not a performance enhancing accessory or anything like that. It doesn't alter the functionality of the firearm. but they're treated much more severely than the actual firearm itself. And that's a problem, and especially given the increasing popularity of suppressors for hunters, for shooters, whether it's getting kids out shooting and putting them on their first deer rifle, right? As you and I both know, taking young kids out and putting them on a 308 for the first time, it's pretty nerve wracking for those folks. So, being able to easily access a suppressor in a legal manner is really important for us at CSF from a recruitment standpoint as well.
Absolutely. What's the update? We'll transition over to Bears Ears. Give us the update there and what we can look at.
Yeah, so Bears Ears is a really, really big win for us in terms of maintaining recreational shooting access. So in October of 2024, the Bureau of Land Management put out a proposal to ban recreational shooting within the entirety of the 1.3 million acre Bears Ears National Monument in southeast Utah. We protested that through a formal process that is known as the protest process, and sent in our opposition to the BLM and said, hey, this runs extremely counter to the 2019 Dingle Act and the open unless closed provision specifically, which says that any closure has to be for the smallest area possible to protect whether it's a cultural site, a historical site, scientific site, etc. It has to be the smallest area possible. But when you're talking about a monument-wide closure of 1.3 million acres, that flies in the face of the smallest area possible. So as a result, we protested that proposal. And just last week, the BLM announced that they were going to maintain recreational shooting in its current form within the National Monument, which is a massive, massive win for recreational shooting.
Yeah, that's a great turn of events there, and great for the community, and obviously your leadership on that when you guys put that together. Um, Hopefully starts a trend, right, with some of these monuments
That's
and
right.
things of that nature, and to start. Well, we'll get there. We'll just leave that. Well, I'll put a pin in that. Come back to it.
I think, the important part to point out here is that you're singling out a highly popular and long-standing activity within national monuments, in this case, Bears Ears, and there's no other reason other than a fundamental opposition to recreational shooting that we can draw a conclusion to. So, um, again, big win. Glad that we were engaged in the trenches to make sure that access was maintained for hunters and shooters.
Heck yeah! Thanks for that update, Taylor. Now, since we have you, might as well take advantage of your time. Um, New administration is in. Things are happening fast and furious. As far as our concerns go, is there anything you can pull the curtain back on? Things we're looking forward to working with the 119th and the new administration and new cabinet level members that affect our business.
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question, Fred. And as you and I have talked about, and this is the nature of us at CSF, our issues are nonpartisan, right? Our priorities don't change as the administrations change because all we care about is, as you know, and the listeners know, is good conservation, good access, and protecting and promoting our outdoor traditions. So, some of the things that we'll be working on with the administration is implementing some recently enacted laws. We had three bills get across the finish line that the president signed in December and early January. Uh, Obviously, the rubber really meets the road to going to implement those bills. Congress can pass words on paper, but if the agencies aren't implementing them, they're meaningless. So we're going to be working with the team at the Department of the Interior and Agriculture and other agencies, federal agencies, to implement some of these bills. Certainly, access is going to be a big, big focus for us. In recent years, there have been efforts to limit um, the use of lead ammo and tackle on federal lands. We'll be working to restore that and maintain hunter choice, hunter and angler choice. So there's just a couple things, but again, our priorities are bipartisan, and we're looking forward to working with the new administration to get wins for sportsmen and women.
Awesome, Taylor. Thanks so much for your time. Thanks for the update, and yeah, lots to look forward to. And then certainly when we have more updates, we'll bring you back on and bring the listeners the updates. Appreciate it.
Awesome. Great to be with you, Fred. Thank you.
All right. Thank you to Taylor for his time. The rest of the headlines here in a a much quieter spot. Um, but as I said, we're still working while we're out here at shot, and you got to take those opportunities when you get them to bring the news. So anyway, let's get into the rest of the headlines here. Another article headline from Taylor. Third full week of new Congress, three CSF priorities set to receive vote on the House floor.
This week, the House is scheduled to vote on 3 bipartisan CSF priorities that build upon recent victories for conservation access, modernizing access to our public waters, MAP Waters Act, as well as the Shark Act, as we reported. And later on this week, the House is scheduled to vote on the Fix Our Forest Act, a critical bill to improve forest health while bolstering fish and wildlife habitat. The MAP Waters Act, led by Congressional Sportsmen's Caucus member Rep. Blake Moore and CSC Vice Chair Rep. Panetta, requires the Bureau of Land Management, Bureau of Reclamation, National Park Service, U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, and U.S. Forest Service to modernize and digitize public water mapping information. This legislation will help sportsmen and women to know not only where they can access rivers and bodies of water, but also understand regulations on things such waterways that are open and closed to certain types of watercraft, horsepower restrictions, aquatic invasive species, inspection requirements, and what bait and lures are allowed for fishing, among others. It's a pretty strong tool there. The Shark Act, as we've reported on, led by CSC members Rep. Whitman and VC, would simply establish the non-regulatory task force that would study and make recommendations to improve on the shark depredation, as well as identify and research priorities for funding opportunities. In recent years, particularly in the Atlantic Ocean and the Gulf of Mexico. Do I still say that? We'll update if that is the official law. Uh, moving on. The frequency of sharks intercepting fish being landed by anglers and commercial fishermen has increased substantially. Finally, the Fix Our Forest Act, led by CSE co-chair Rep. Westerman and Rep. Peters, would designate fireshed management areas to prioritize them for active management to reduce wildfire risk, including increasing acreage limitations on several existing categorical exclusions. HR 471 would also establish an interagency office known as the Fireshed Center to promote data sharing and coordination among agencies to streamline processes and comprehensively address wildfire threats to communities. Among other reforms, the legislation would clarify uh, consultation requirements for the U.S. Forest Service and Bureau of Land Management following the 2015 Cottonwood Environmental Law Center versus U.S. Forest Service decision that has hindered forest managers' management projects, strengthen the Good Neighbor Authority, reauthorize collaborative forest landscape restoration program, and act reforms to discourage litigation that hinders forest health improvement projects and codify 20-year stewardship contracting. And it's doing a lot. CSF is looking forward to seeing these 3 priorities pass the House and will continue supporting them through the remainder of the legislative process. Moving on, bill to discard proposed fishing closures introduced. This one from Chris Horton. National Marine Fisheries Service released a proposed sectorial amendment for the snapper grouper fishery management plan in the South Atlantic that recognizes that the red snapper population is in better shape than previously described, while simultaneously seeking to eliminate substantial recreational fishing opportunities. The Red Snapper Act, HR 470, would prevent any bottom fishing closures until the result of an ongoing in-depth fishery independent survey are incorporated into the next stock assessment. The proposed closure to bottom fishing by NMFS is anticipated to result in a 24% reduction in red snapper mortality for anglers normally fishing for other species and having to release red snapper, a percentage of which are estimated to die. With the population no longer considered overfished and high recruitment in recent years to the population, NMFS is proposing to increase the red snapper annual catch limit, accounting for release mortality in the other months, potentially expand the summer open season for red snapper by 5 to 8 days. However, a 6 to 9 day red snapper season seems like a difficult change to accept for not being able to fish for any popular reef species for 90 days. If the amendment specifies that the science no longer considers red snapper population overfished, then the question becomes why there's a need for an amendment at all. Well, on Thursday of last week, some members of Congress responded. Representatives John Rutherford and Darren Soto, along with Senator Rick Scott in the Senate and several original co-sponsors, reintroduced the Red Snapper Act as a backstop to requiring bottom closures in favor of better science. Currently, the congressionally funded absolute abundance study similar to the red snapper count in the Gulf of Mexico, Gulf of Mexico, by using even more cutting edge technologies is in the final stages. This unprecedented fishery independent survey in the South Atlantic will provide a much more realistic estimate of red snapper abundance in the region. Results of the study are expected later this year. The Red Snapper Act would simply delay an unnecessary bottom closure until the results of that study are incorporated into the next red snapper stock assessment and management advice. We are glad to see NMFS recognize that red snapper populations continue to rebuild under the current fishing effort, and that the population is no longer overfished, further supporting our contention that bottom fishing closure is completely unwarranted. That coming from our own Chris Horton. Additionally, we are very thankful for Reps Rutherford, Soto, and Senator Scott to introduce the Red Snapper Act to prevent any drastic and unnecessary management decisions like implementing bottom closures until we have a true look at the population abundance from ongoing studies. The fishery continues to rapidly rebuild, and overfishing is no longer occurring, so the sky is not falling. In fact, it's complete opposite. That from Chris Horton. Next up, legislation to increase poaching penalties and fines introduced in Tennessee is coming from Connor Barker. In 2024, Tennessee Legislative Sportsmen's Caucus co-chair Senator Paul Rose, caucus member Representative Caleb Hemmer introduced HB 2141 and Senate Bill 1751 that would have increased poaching penalties and fines for the volunteer state. Unfortunately, both those bills failed to advance last year. Earlier this month, the caucus member Representative Caleb Hemmer and Senator Paige Wally introduced House Bill 24 and Senate Bill 14, which would increase the penalty for removing wildfowl, or fish while trespassing from a Class C misdemeanor to a Class B misdemeanor, and increase various fines. CSF submitted comments supporting the proposed legislation in 2024 and will likewise be supporting the initiative again this year. Connor continues, as emotional driven attacks from the anti-hunting community have become more common over recent years. See Colorado Prop 127. The need to promote our time-honored traditions in a positive light is paramount. Anti-hunting groups often attempt to create false narratives that conflates legal hunting with poaching while trying to appeal to the non-hunting public to advance their agenda. The protection of our hunting heritage can come in many forms, and one of those is through hunting community leading the charge and strengthening poaching fines and penalties. Can I get an amen? House Bill 24 and Senate Bill 14 would increase the penalty of poaching from a Class C to a Class B misdemeanor in addition to increasing various fines. This would be a significant increase from several fine minimums currently in place under Tennessee law, some of which are as low as $25. To put this in perspective, the current Tennessee resident annual combination hunting and fishing license costs $33. Yeah, we could certainly stand to do that almost everywhere. I know some of the other states, particularly in the West, have done so and increased some fines. But yeah, I think we've covered this a couple weeks ago. Some of your fines for poaching are equivalent to a parking ticket. That's got to change. So more to come on that out of Tennessee. Press release went out last week, but we're going to cover it here real quick. Rule to slow boaters in the Atlantic now on a better course. And in the interest of time here, because the last 2 weeks we've run long, we've got so much going on here to kick off the year. The short and sweet of this is, because we've covered this extensively with Chris Horton, is that the proposal to set up buffer zone speed limits around North Atlantic right whale The proposal's been pulled. So, um, I can read you this quote here from Chris Horton, kind of sums it up. We're very glad to see NOAA withdraw the rule and an opportunity to work towards meaningful whale conservation members while protecting angler access and coastal economies at the same time. The recreational boating and fishing community and members of the Congressional and state sportsmen's caucuses understand the importance of protecting whales. We look forward to doing just that in a more meaningful way. Yeah. And, again, you want to talk about the power of NASC. We had the opportunity to weigh in and activate our coastal members, people that live on the coast over here in the Atlantic, and we had a lot of our co-chairs sign on to a letter that weigh in on our opposition to this, and results driven. Here you go. So uh, certainly not a completely done deal. There's solutions to be had here, but these insane restrictions that they were looking to do have been tabled at this moment. So good stuff there. Congressional Sportsmen Foundation launches Forestry Advisory Council. Another press release here. This month, CSF launched the CSF Forestry Advisory Council to bring together the forest industry and the hunting conservation community to work collaboratively to provide guidance to CSF to inform and advance policies that facilitate active forest management, support a robust forest industry, and improve wildlife habitat and access for sportsmen and women. The establishment of the CSF Forestry Advisory Council, which will meet regularly throughout the year, builds on CSF's recently expanded uh, emphasis on forest policy, which will significantly increase CSF's capacity to engage on state and federal issues that impact both the forest industry and sporting community. CSF Forestry Advisory Council is comprised of organizations and individuals dedicated to promoting sportsman access, wildlife conservation, and sustainable forest management. This from our director of forest policy, John Colclasure. Hunters and foresters have a long history of working together on natural resource management issues dating back to the beginning of the conservation movement in the United States. The CSF Forestry Advisory Council builds on that tradition, and or John, am excited to work with our partners in the forestry and sportsmen's communities to move the needle on issues impacting our shared forest conservation priorities. CSF Forestry Advisory Council member organizations and individuals representing the organizations include uh, Craig Anderson, Director of Government Affairs, Forest Landowners Association; Ryan Bronson, Director of Government Affairs, Rocky Mountain Elk Foundation; James Cummins, immediate past uh, President, Boone and Crockett Club and CSF Board of Directors; Brian Brian Luoma, CSF Board of Directors, retired CEO and President of the Westerville Company; Dion Nelson, Vice President of Government Relations, National Alliance of Forestry Owners; Bill Bill and Bergamo, Executive Director, Federal Forest Resource Coalition; James James McKittrick, Director of Government Affairs, National Association of State Foresters; and Tom Spezies, Director of Conservation Programs, NWTF. During the inaugural meeting, CSF Forestry Advisory Council adopted its charter, bylaws, elected officers, and discussed issues and legislation that will form CSF's policy, prioritization, and engagement strategy. Brian Luoma was elected chairman, and Dion Nelson was elected vice chairman. All things forestry coming together nicely. Congrats, John. Semi-auto firearms ban introduced in Colorado. What did I say at the top? Colorado doing Colorado things now. That's gonna be the new New York doing New York things. Let's see what foolishness is about. Colorado SB 25003 seeks to ban many semi-automatic fire rifles and shotguns commonly used by American sportsmen and women in hunting and recreational shooting. Modern sporting rifles and semi-automatic shotguns are not only important to our heritage, are highly popular in recreational shooting community. Legislation would severely undermine the hunting heritage, firearm rights, and America's most successful wildlife conservation program, the Pittman-Robertson Act. SB 3, as it's being reported by Barry, would ban the manufacture, distribution, transfer, and sale of semi-automatic firearms that accept a detachable magazine. Current owners of these firearms would be grandfathered in, but future transfers would only be allowed to direct heirs. So someone outside of Colorado or an FFL. It appears that SB 3 has a strong chance of passing this year, potentially impacting hunters and rec shooters in the state. Other so-called assault weapons bans and semi-automatic bans have been tried in Colorado in the past without success. Unfortunately, given the political landscape of Colorado, it is likely that SB 3 will pass. Governor Jared Polis has frequently been a discouraging force on bans behind the scenes. However, the word has yet to come from his office to discourage legislative leaders away from this latest attempt. The passage of SB 3 would have a negative impact on conservation funding and scientific wildlife management in Colorado. Last year, nearly $90 million of revenue was raised for Colorado parks and wildlife for hunting licenses, from hunting licenses. Another $24 million in Pittman and Robinson funding was distributed to Colorado in 23 alone. Any prohibition on the possession, transport, and sale of some of the most commonly used firearms will depress participation in hunting and recreational shooting and eliminate a large portion of contributions to the Pittman Robinson Fund, together resulting in millions of dollars lost for Colorado parks and wildlife. We will continue to bring you updates out of Colorado from Barry on this troubling piece of legislation. Wrapping up here, 2 articles to touch on here. Indiana bill would create an unfunded mandate for the DNR. This comes from Bob Matthews. Indiana Senate Bill 32 would establish a pilot program to identify, breed, and release certain white-tailed deer on Indiana's landscape. No funds are provided in the legislation to allow the Indiana Department of Natural Resources to carry out this new body of work, but the legislation would allow them to sell farm-raised deer for $500 each. The bill undermines Indiana DNR's authority to manage the state's deer populations through sound, science-based decision-making by forcing management practices on them, regardless of whether they believe it to be in the best interest of the resource. CSF worked with state and national partners to generate opposition to SB 32, resulting in the Senate Committee on Natural Resources tabling the bill. Indiana Senate Bill 32 would establish the chronic wasting disease pilot program. CWD, as we've covered, is a very fatal, progressive, degenerative disease and no known cures at this moment. As introduced, the bill does not establish an upfront funding source or staff allocation to establish the program, but would charge the Indiana DNR with collecting and testing DNA samples of white-tailed deer in the Hoosier State, as well as creating and operating a captive breeding program to identify, breed, and release white-tailed deer that have certain genetic markers. All, as with all fish and wildlife management decisions, responses to the potential spread of CWD should be based on established science practices, and any legislation should empower the state fish and wildlife agencies, such as the Indiana DNR, with the authority to protect the state's served populations rather than establishing an experimental pilot program that cuts into staff resources and funding paid off the back of the hunters and anglers. The bill legislatively requires the agency to add farmed deer to the state's free-ranging white-tailed deer herds rather than allowing the DNR's biologists to utilize their experience and expertise to decide what's best for the deer herd in Indiana. CSF has worked in concert with national partners to oppose SB 32 which undermines Indiana's DNR management authority and places unfunded mandate on them that would detract from the agency's existing critical work to manage the state's fish and wildlife resources. The bill was scheduled for a committee hearing last week, but given the strong coordinated opposition from Indiana sportsmen and women, the bill was tabled. CSF will continue to monitor the legislation and its proposed amendments. We'll have to bring more on that from Bob because it's very, very Frankenstein like for me reading that. So we're introducing captive deer into wild herds with the hopes that they'll pass on genetics that are able to withstand CWD. Is that what I'm getting out of that? We'll dig in more and find out more from Bob. It's certainly interesting, but sounds incredibly problematic. All right, let's wrap it up. Sportsman's Caucus co-chair reintroduces one of CSF's top priorities in Virginia. Kaylee Leaguer brings us this: the reimbursement to state fish and wildlife agencies for free and discounted license is a key priority for CSF. HB 2523 is currently awaiting a hearing in the House Committee on Agriculture, Chesapeake, and Natural Resources. The Virginia Department of Wildlife Resources receives approximately 77% of its funding from sportsmen and women generated dollars through the ASCF. 2523 picks up on the good work of former Legislative Sportsmen's Caucus co-chair Delegate James Edmonds, who sponsored House Bill 2470 in the last legislature. 2470 passed the House Committee on Agriculture, Chesapeake, and Natural Resources, but never received a vote in the House Committee on Appropriations. The legislation is necessary in preventing the future loss of sportsmen's dollars, as we've covered numerous times, and just gets the reimbursement for those free and discounted licenses. State agencies primary funded by our sportsman dollars, which is why this is so important. So as this continues to move and get picked up, we will bring you more. This, if it continues on, would have an effective date of July 1st, 2025. Kaylee is also hard at work introducing similar language in more of our mid-Atlantic states. So hopefully more good news to come. And as we've covered, like I said in the past, it's almost an impossible situation without the context to come out against, some special segment identified population of people, certainly deserving a free and discounted license. Is a nice nod to the cap for, again, all the different demos. However, we got to backfill that and pay that back. So, if you can get beyond our initial opposition and get to here's why and here's how we can fix it, then certainly you can come out. Everyone comes out great on that. So, thanks for bearing with me here. Starting to come away, I think, with a little hoarse voice. As per the normal, coming to Las Vegas, you leave with less money and more illness, I think, every time. And I believe that's setting in. So thank you for bearing with my my more monotone stylings for this week. Yeah, that's it. Thanks for hanging in. Obviously we had the holiday at the beginning of the week and the travel, so one day delayed, but as always, we appreciate you tuning in and checking our weekly updates out. As always, these come out on typically Wednesday. You can follow along in the reading, or you can get these articles when they do come out by going to congressionalsportsman.org, subscribing to the EPUB of the Sportsman's Voice. You can get all these articles, all the article links that you can take deeper dives and go to the resources and just educate yourself beyond the headline. And I encourage you to do that. I think that's a wrap from Vegas, from Shot. Again, thanks to Taylor. This is a monster. If you've never been, it is a lot to take in, and we have a lot of good work to get done and meet with partners. So again, scheduling in-person interviews is kind of tough, but we made it happen. That's it. Yeah. So today, also we have our um, feature episode with our friends at Traditions, also from the Floor of Shot Show, in their booth. So get this one, and then as you're driving around later, or maybe through the weekend, check that out. Got some new tech on muzzle loaders that they're going to talk about, and more policy driven items there. But that's it. That's it from Vegas. Tune in next Wednesday. We'll bring you more of the headlines from around the nation and conservation issues. And then we'll have a week off of the feature and continue on. So, um, just like it says in the out, like, subscribe, rate, stars, all that. It helps us. You guys are doing a great job. We're certainly seeing a huge uptick in people coming to the program, using it as the resource that it is. And I hope you guys are finding great value in it. We will see you all next Wednesday. If you're flying home or going wherever from shot, if you're out here, safe travels to everybody. Get home safely. That's it. As always, CSF is your inside connection to outdoor legislation. See you next week. Bye.
Thanks for joining us on this edition of the Sportsman's Voice podcast. Ladies and gentlemen, your support is crucial, and you can help us out right now by leaving a review, filling in those 5 stars where available, sharing this episode with friends and family, and engaging with us socially. CSF can be found on Facebook, Instagram, and X, formerly known as Twitter. Together, we can protect the outdoor sports we love and continue to keep you informed wherever you are. That's it for this week. Until next time, we'll see you later.